So Geoffrey, tell me, where were you born?
I was born in Australia, in Melbourne,
Okay.
when my father was in the Air Force there.
Okay.
He was in the Air Force in the last couple of years of the Second World War,
Oh, was he? Okay.
and flying up from the north of Australia into Indonesia and that area. And then after the war he demobbed, but then re-entered the Air Force just before the Korean War.
Okay. Do you have siblings? Do you have?
I have two brothers.
Are they older or younger?
They're twins. One of them was in Japan for many years. He was at the embassy, and he worked for the Northwest Shelf Gas and the West Australian government.
Okay.
And
Are they younger or older?
they're 1 year younger.
1 year younger. Okay.
The other one is a barrister, but he's just retired.
Are they identical or fraternal?
They're identical twins, although the elder of the two, who was in Japan, who speaks very good Japanese, terribly has multiple sclerosis.
Oh,
So he's quite immobile
Yes.
these days.
Oh.
They both live in Perth.
Did they both have wives? Did they get married and have
Yeah,
kids?
Michael, the one who was in Japan for many years, his son still lives in Tokyo, works for Sony, I think.
Okay.
Went to ASIJ and then Stanford, I think. So he's never really lived in Australia.
All right. But so his wife was Japanese?
No, she was Australian.
Australian, okay. Oh.
Terribly, when he got MS, she bailed. But anyway,
That's sad to hear. Sad to
that's.
hear.
And my other brother Stephen, he's got 3 children and
Okay.
a number of grandchildren. So
What about yourself?
I have 3 sons,
Okay.
2 from my first marriage. My first wife passed away in 1995,
Sorry to hear that.
and in a triumph of hope over experience, I remarried.
Remarried? Okay.
So I have 1 son, and my wife still lives in Tokyo here.
Okay. She's
But-
Japanese?
Yeah, both of them were Japanese.
Oh, okay.
So
All right.
my second son's a member of TAC, actually.
Is that right?
Alex Walker.
Okay.
He's living in Singapore at the moment, but I think they're going to come back to Japan.
So you're saying he must be married and have kids?
He's got
his
2
own?
children. His
Okay.
wife works for JP Morgan
Is that
in
right?
Singapore.
Okay.
So, and as I said, my oldest son is now 40. He has been in the film business for quite a few years as a cinematographer. So he's worked on a lot of quite big films in
Name some.
Star Wars,
I guess. Well, okay, you're done.
Mission
You're done.
Impossible,
You're done. That's
Mission
good.
Impossible,
Wow.
the Mad Max film they did down in South Africa,
Yeah.
and more recently the latest Mad Max film they did in Australia. He's done quite a lot of big films.
Those are big films. Those are big. I don't think you get any bigger than that.
His
Those are
wife,
the big
his
films.
wife works for the Australian Chamber Orchestra.
Wow.
So they've got one daughter. So I have 3 grandchildren, and my youngest son Andrew is 27. He went to the British school here in
Okay,
Tokyo.
yes.
And
He's 27, you said?
yeah,
Okay, because I taught at the British school. I had my 3 boys at the British school when it was only 3 years after it had opened.
oh, in Shibuya
In
originally.
Shibuya, yes.
Yeah.
Before they went to Showa campus.
And they're moving up here, I see.
They're moving. I just saw that just the other day.
Yeah.
They took me through there to have a tour. That's going to be all the elementary up to secondary. I think they're going up to the age 6
There's
years
over
old.
1,000 students there now.
They're going to have the biggest secondary school in Japan,
Yeah.
I think, of international schools, I mean.
So my youngest son is, he works for a New York-based company called Mongo
Mm-hmm.
DB. They're a large AI database company.
Okay.
So he works for them based in Sydney, but he can work from anywhere, and earns more than the rest of us put together. I mean,
That's
they,
wonderful. It's good to have people like that in your family, you know. So you don't have to, you can feel pretty comfortable in life. You know,
Yeah.
your kids, if you have a good relationship with them. Let me ask you this, Geoffrey. When you were growing up, were you more of an academic kid, or were you more sports minded?
more sports, I suppose. I have, like a lot of young children these days, I have a sort of an attention span deficiency. So, academically I did fine,
Okay.
but I preferred sports.
Okay. What sports did you like?
I used to do a lot of swimming,
Oh, did you? You were
Yeah.
good at swimming?
and I
Okay.
played some rugby, but more field hockey. I don't know if you've heard of.
Oh yeah, field hockey. Yeah.
That's quite a big sport
That's
in
right,
Australia. Yeah.
right.
So I went back to school. We moved to Hong Kong when I was about 3.
Okay.
And then I went
So
back.
you went back to Hong Kong?
We went to Hong Kong in 1957.
But you were born in Australia?
Yes. And my father.
So how old were you in 1957?
I was I was 4. I was born in 1952. So
So we're the same age.
my birthday. I was 71 a couple of days ago.
Okay, so you beat me. I'll be 71 in October.
Oh, okay.
So you beat me by a couple of months. But we're both 50. We're both dragons.
Correct.
You're the dragons. Yeah. That's interesting.
As was one of my closest friends here. You probably met him over the years. Passed away a few years ago. C.W. Nicol. Do you remember him? Writer and environmentalist. Lived up.
I'm sure if I saw.
In Nagano.
But he never. No, he wasn't here. But I know of him. I do.
He
know
never
of
lived in Tokyo.
No,
He lived in
I
Nagano.
know of him. I know of him, and he was very famous.
Yeah,
People knew the Prince and Princess
Yes.
of Japan, the Prime Minister. They all went to visit him.
And Prince
walked
Charles
around
was been up
That's
there.
right. Yes.
So
No, I know of him, but
we still have a house. I still have a house up there next
Do
to.
you really?
He has a woodland trust called Afan Woodland Trust, and I'm just trying to remember the name of. You probably met him. Worked at the U.S. Embassy for many years. Jim Foster.
Jim Foster. If I see him, maybe.
Yeah. But Nick passed away about 2 years ago,
Right.
and all of his property, all the money he made over the years, he's invested back in the Woodland Trust. So we have some land next to there, which I've just donated to the trust, actually.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It's a nice house we have up there, but the kids are not going to use it, and just maintenance and stuff. So I gave them the house as well. So.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's nice. Is that why you're here now? Or you just did that, or you did that before?
I'm completing. I've got to go up and
now.
see the lawyer and talk to the people at the trust. So I'm doing that.
But you're going to still keep something in Japan, aren't you?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
We just rent an apartment in Ikura Hills there,
Right.
which is very, very reasonable.
Right, and everything works beautifully in Japan. It doesn't matter about the space; everything works.
And the food here is
good.
superb. And the cost of living here is
Right.
probably half what it is in Sydney.
Especially because you know your way around, you know where to go, you know what to get. So it's a little bit different than tourists coming here, not knowing, sent to the most expensive places.
But Tokyo, Japan, for what you get, Japan is cheap.
I think so. Having lived here all my life, all my adult life.
I guess I've lived in Japan altogether for about 36 years. Or
Okay.
so.
I'll be 50 years soon. Yeah, I came here when I was 24.
I was a student at Keio University in the early 70s.
Studying what?
Japanese and also economic history.
Oh, so you're Asian studies and economics?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that what you got your degree in?
Yeah.
Okay. So then when you came here then, did you stay after you got out of college or did you go back home?
I went and worked in Hong Kong for a couple of years with a British company called Swire, Swire and Sons.
Ooh, you were touching a lot of areas. They owned the apartment that I lived in my last
And Meguro.
Meguro house.
Yeah.
And that was and I forget his name who was the
Richard
president.
Neal.
Richard Neal. How was he doing?
He's doing okay, I guess. His son had a lot of issues.
I know. I knew his son.
And his wife is not so well. They live in near Brighton in England.
Oh, they didn't stay here.
They didn't stay in Japan.
See, 'cause
his wife's brother is a doctor in Tokyo here somewhere. But I had a mail from him a few weeks ago. I think he's just been in Japan for a visit.
Is that right? Yeah. I knew Mill. It didn't go so well because we were moving out of the apartment and it's how he wanted me to move out. And I said, I don't think so.
Oh, yeah.
So we kept it open longer than it needed to be, they felt. And he offered, he said, we'll offer to sell it to you. I was too young at the time and I was scared and I didn't know anyone.
I think Swires at the time,
They were getting rid of their property.
they had businesses in Japan, obviously
Right.
Cathay Pacific.
Right.
They had a shipping agency business and they were
Yes.
getting out of...
That's right. But what's happened to Swire and Sons? They still exist?
Oh yeah, they're still a huge company.
Okay.
They employ about 300,000 people.
The sons are still part of it?
Yeah, they're the grandsons and things
Okay,
now.
right.
but
Are they based in Hong Kong still? I won't
Hong
think
Kong
so.
and London. But
Really?
they have businesses they're still quite big in shipping. They have bulk carriers and offshore oil supply ships and that sort of thing. They have tea plantations in Sri Lanka. They own US Cold Storage, which is the largest cold storage company in the United States.
Wow.
They own quite a lot of agricultural property in Australia.
Why do you know so much about Swire and Sons?
I worked for them.
You did work for them. What was your position there?
I was in the shipping business.
Okay.
And my father worked for them too, because he was a pilot with Cathay Pacific.
Okay. Wow.
So we went.
Did you ever meet the Swires? Did you ever meet any?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
There were two brothers who were the sons of, or the grandson of the original. It used to be called Butterfield and Swire, and it was based in Shanghai.
Okay.
They were a trading business, and then they started shipping.
What years are we talking?
Oh, mid 1800s.
That's what I was going to think. Yeah.
Late 1800s.
Right.
And then they really, after the communist takeover in China, they moved everything to Hong Kong, like a lot of people did.
Right.
And they're quite big in property. They own Coca-Cola franchises around Asia, and so they're quite big. They were in Japan. They owned buildings in Kobe and Yokohama. So on the Yokohama Bund down there, one of the old buildings there was the Swire House originally.
Okay. Is that right? Well, they lived there. They had the Swire House, meaning
They didn't live there, but that was their shipping headquarter business.
Okay, okay.
And then in later times, they had a thing called Swire House up in Ichibancho.
Okay.
And the family themselves, Adrian and John Swire, owned the apartments. They owned 2 apartment buildings in Tokyo, but that was separate from the company. That was their own private.
That was Meguro House?
Meguro House, and there was one more, I've forgotten.
And the Meguro House was built by Homat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Matsumoto, yeah.
Richard was basically the last president, essentially, of Swire in Japan.
Okay.
And his job was to tidy it up and get rid of the, sell off things. Yeah. Richard was a very nice, kind, and soft-spoken guy.
He was. There's no doubt about that.
So so Swire is pretty much not. I mean, they still have a bit of few shipping interests here, and the airline still flies here, of course.
Yes, that's true.
But,
so you left Keio, and then you went to.
I went to Hong Kong with Swire, and then I was in Korea with them for a number of years.
So you stayed with them throughout your whole career?
No. I stayed with them for about 5 years.
Okay, and then where'd you go from there?
And then I went and worked with some Chinese friends of mine who. One of them had been in Swire and in the shipping container leasing business, a company called Genstar, which was owned by a Canadian group, and we sold the business to GE Capital. And then I was running the business in North Asia, and then I moved to Sydney and set up the business in Sydney.
Doing what?
Essentially leasing equipment to shipping companies.
Okay. What kind of equipment? The containers?
Containers, boxes.
The containers, okay, that's what you're doing, okay. Because I was in the medical equipment business. I was the largest buyer and seller of used CT scanners for 10 years in Japan.
Right.
Right, I guess you remember that. I was using Maersk, yes. And I used
Well, they were our biggest customer, really.
Is that right, Maersk was?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Is that right?
But in those days, a decent-sized container leasing company maybe owned, I think, when I left, the company owned about 300,000 containers, and now the largest companies like Triton and Textainer own 3 million containers.
That's interesting. Well, I was just happy to get one scanner in a 40-foot container, because we couldn't use the 20-foot. We had to use 40 because of all the components and stuff.
Yeah.
I was just learning. Sometimes we'd have open top.
Yeah, open top, and there's flat tops.
Flat tops and everything. I started learning
flat
some of
racks
the jargon.
and reefers.
That's
and,
right.
Tanks and all sorts of stuff. Right. So, I mean, containerization really revolutionized transport.
It did. And then people had to have those ports, too, to accept it, because they didn't know about that.
And those, that bit of equipment, it's the gift that keeps on giving, because you use it or lease it out for 7 or 8 years, and then you sell it in the second-hand market, and a lot of people use them for storage.
That's right, housing,
mining
everything.
sites and housing, and
they do, yeah.
They last forever.
They sure do, those steel containers. That's interesting. Wow. So you did that. So how long were you in the business?
For 10 years.
For 10 years.
Then I joined the government.
Okay.
The New South Wales state government. I was in Sydney, and my wife, my first wife, sort of was okay in Sydney, but maybe wanted to come back to Japan. So I saw this job advertised and I applied for it. In those days, they didn't even test my Japanese or...
What was the job?
It was the commissioner for the state government of New South Wales in Japan.
And your responsibilities?
Basically, trade promote. Originally, the state government office was set up in Japan because the coal exports from New South Wales were essentially government controlled, and the government wanted to have some representation in Japan to deal with the steel mills and the power utilities in Japan. But we used to be involved in essentially trade promotion and tourism promotion, that kind of thing.
Mm.
I think a number of the US states also have representative
Right,
offices
yes.
in Canadian provinces.
Right.
And so I did that in 1988. That's when I joined the American Club.
Okay, in 88. Okay, what was that in 88?
And I think
that's
that
what, that, we
the president of the time, I saw his...
That was Bob Collins.
No, it was before Bob. It was the guy, he was with PwC, I think.
Because I joined in 88, and Bob Collins was one of my sponsors.
But he wasn't the president then, I don't think.
Yes, he was. From 88, let me think, let me get my head right. I know I've been a member since 1988, yes. Yes, right, I'm sure, because Lewis was, my son was born then.
It would have been before.
It's Bob Collins.
Bob was the president after that, I think. After this guy.
No, I'll show you down there, because I'm sure, because he was my first...
I can picture him. He worked for Price Waterhouse.
Because Bob worked for AIG.
Yeah.
Bob was the president of AIG, and he was over at TAC at that time, because I remember he was always standing up in the suit. He was always there. I don't know the person before him, but he's up there. I'll show you, because we'll go down there.
Yeah, it was...
but he was,
think of his
in
name.
88, Bob Collins was the president.
Maybe in late 88. Because this...
Or maybe he did start late 88, because I joined in 88, but I know Bob was the one that was he was my sponsor, and then I got one of the Connors boys. I got Nick Connors to be my seconder.
I had Bill Hall was my sort of second.
Bill Hall.
Bill was a teacher of mine at university.
Was he? Jeez.
He's still around.
I know. We belonged to the Tokyo Club together.
Yeah.
And I taught his son.
Oh, he was the librarian.
I taught
there
his
or
son. He
something.
was a secretary or something, yes.
Yeah.
Bill Hall is something. He's still there. And his wife still does her paintings.
Yeah.
And his son, I've had him on the podcast.
Willie's I bumped into him last time I was here.
Willie's good. I taught him when he was a little kid. I taught him when Bill had him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he was at ASIJ, wasn't
That's
he?
right.
Because I used to do some coaching of the soccer
Is that right?
at St Mary's. My two elder boys went to St Mary's.
Uh-huh. That's good.
So, so I'm just trying to remember. Yeah, I remember Bob very well because his daughter was at ASIJ
That's
as
right.
well.
A good swimmer. I taught her swimming, yeah.
And what was it? Murder at the Tokyo Club.
He
Tokyo
wrote
American
that book.
Club.
I think he wrote 2 books, but that was one of them, Murder at the Tokyo Club. That's right.
Because he was quite good friends of the guy who was the manager for a long time here.
You're talking about Dick Bush?
Yeah, Dick Bush.
They had the three of them. It was Dick Bush, him, and someone else. Those 3 guys were like Frank Sinatra. You know,
Yeah,
the Rat Pack. They call it Rat Pack.
They used to frequent the
Traders Bar. That's right.
The Trader Vic's.
That's right. Trader Vic's? Oh,
Down at
Trader.
the New
That's right.
Otani.
The New Otani. That's
Yeah.
where they would be. Right.
So yeah,
Because they made Dick Bush general manager here.
Yeah,
You sure did.
yeah. There was a lot in those days. It was sort of
It was the
a
old
lot
boys
of
club.
the ex
Old boys
guys
club.
who'd been here with the occupation and all of that sort of stuff.
They took care of each other.
Yeah,
They sure did. They had their own code and nobody could break it. If you were in that group, you're in that group. So that's why I wanted him to be my sponsor, because I knew if I had him as a sponsor, I doubted anybody would say no.
yeah,
So he was my sponsor and he was the president.
yeah. So your number must be close to my number.
13671.
13253.
So you came in just before. That's right. So then maybe he wasn't president then.
No, he wasn't. I know because
He wasn't,
This
yes.
guy was the
Yeah.
one of the partners. Or
But he was president in 88.
Yeah.
I know that.
This
But
was
it
early
at the end of
88.
it, yeah. So early 88. He was giving up his presidency, right?
I know.
We'll
His
find it.
picture's still down
It
there.
has to be, yes. Yes. And one black guy.
And before that, I was a member of the YCAC. So
So I became a member there because I had my kids at YIS in St.
yeah,
Maur.
okay.
I had 2 of my boys in St. Maur, 2 of my boys at YS for high school.
I used to play cricket and hockey down there and rugby down
Oh,
there.
you didn't do lawn bowling? That
Not
was so
yet.
funny.
Not
I used to love watching them play lawn bowling and getting in positions. That was so funny. I sat out there all day just enjoying them. Just watching
Yeah.
unfolding.
So a lot of the guys young guys who are here in the shipping business, like Alan Morrison and Robin Hones, and they all were rugby players.
Right.
So we all used to go down the YCAC the
You
weekends.
got there, especially when they put up that new. That was the artificial turf. Would have been the time you still were playing.
No, when we were there,
It was just the dirt. It was just the dirt.
just the dirt. Yeah.
Wow.
So and the tennis courts there. So
Yeah,
it was a nice club. I guess it's still going.
So tell me, what was the experience here when you? So you went there. You said you went. When did you come back to Japan?
I was at university here, and then I went to Hong Kong, and I was in Korea.
Right.
In fact, I was in Korea when Park Chung-hee was assassinated. So,
What was that like?
well, then it was pretty much a military-run country in those days.
right.
And all cars were black, and
That's right.
they had curfew from midnight till
That's
like
right.
4
I
o'clock.
used to go out
and
there then. Yes.
So, as one of my English mates used to say, you'd be down in Itaewon at the one of the clubs at the bar,
Right.
and he'd say, "Oh, Geoffrey, 11 o'clock, time to fall in love."
That's right. Or go to the monkey house. They used to call it.
But yeah, it was an interesting
And they had
place.
the Hamilton Hotel. Yeah.
Oh, the Hamilton, that's where everyone used to go
That's the military hotel. Yeah, kind of.
after, if you got stuck in
If you got
after
stuck in
curfew, you
Goodwood,
go down into the basement
that's
there
right.
for like 4 hours. And so I was there for a couple of years, and I lived there. I was there again for a couple of years when after Korea in 88, not 88, 78 through to 81 or so. And then I moved back to Japan. I started working in the container leasing.
But you were working with the government too. You came back. To
Oh, that
Japan.
was 88.
In '88 is when you came.
So
back.
from 81 through to 88, I
You're in the
worked
container business. Okay.
worked for the leasing business.
Right.
And then we sold our shares out of that. I mean, the business is still going, but I think it's owned by the Chinese these days.
Right.
And then I worked for the government for 10 years
Okay.
here in Tokyo, so from 88 to 98. And then I went and worked in the food business, really, in the dairy-related business.
Now, how'd you get into the food business?
Well, it's just somebody. I was leaving the government after the contract had finished. I didn't
Right.
want to hang around, so someone approached me about setting up the business here for an Australian dairy company.
And you did.
I did, and then we were merged together with the New Zealanders, Fonterra Group,
Okay.
and so I stayed working with them for a while. But I was looking after the business in Korea for a couple of years as well, from Tokyo. So then in, when was that? I keep losing decades.
It's easy to do when you get our age.
So 2002, 3, 4. And then I worked for, again, was approached to set up proper business for a company, an Irish group called Kerry Ingredients,
Okay.
which is a very large food ingredients company globally. So we had a number of factories in Asia, and I guess they had about 200 factories around the world making food ingredients of various kinds. So I worked for them for nearly 10 years, and then retired in 2011, and then was back in Australia most of the time. My wife was still here looking after her mother, and it was very fortunate, really, because my parents passed away during that time.
Okay. Had they stayed together the whole time?
Oh yeah,
So how old were they when they passed?
81 was 86, and my mother was 86. My father was 85. He passed
Okay.
a year or so before she did.
Okay. That's not bad. They had a pretty good run.
Good innings.
Yeah.
As my mother used to say, 80 is kind of the use-by date
There you go. Okay.
for that generation.
Right. But
anyway.
that is for sure. Yeah.
So, and she was in the medical. She was a nurse all her life,
I
really.
see.
Worked in Hong Kong, actually.
Your father stopped flying when?
He retired from. In those days, they retired at 55.
55, right.
It's now 65.
That's right.
So he was happy. They were happy to leave Hong Kong after 25 years or so.
Okay.
He stopped flying when he was 55, or he stopped flying with Cathay,
Commercial, right.
and then built his own private little aeroplane. He got a kit from the United States from our. It was what are they called? They're from near Portland there.
Okay.
RV, Vans aircraft.
Okay.
And built it himself and did a bit of flying in that.
Did he? Wow.
So no, they both had a good
That's
life.
good. That's good. That's
So
what
then,
we're
in a
trying to
triumph of hope over experience, I was approached by the New South Wales government again to set up their office in Japan again.
do. When was this?
2013.
Okay. And you did it.
I did it, and it was the worst thing I ever did in my life.
Why was that? Why was it?
They hadn't thrown any proper resourcing at it, so it was just myself and a.
Wait, you had to fund. Wait. I don't understand. You mean resources as far as people or money?
Both.
So how could you do it then?
Well, I did the best I could. You know, I had a lot of connections, and the embassy helped me a lot, and so.
Were they promising you something at the end of it?
Well, they
or
were
something?
going to do this and going to do that. But,
Okay.
you know, the problem was it was run by low-level bureaucrats in Australia. Things like, well, if you have to do any entertaining, you have to get prior permission. So I said, you mean if I want to take someone out for a cup of coffee? And they, hey, you've got to write and I said, no, I can't do that.
So how long did you stay with them?
I was originally going to do 2 years. I did 3 to help because a lot of the politicians kept visiting here, and I had to look after them. And then in the end, I said, no, I can't do this anymore.
Right.
And then a few years later, they bit the bullet and they've set it up properly. They've got a proper office in Kyobashi.
But you weren't involved.
No.
Okay.
There's a guy called Michael Newman.
Okay.
Who'd been here with Macquarie Bank and various things for quite a few years.
It sounds to me like what you did was you showed them the potential. And
well,
and after you showed them the potential, then they said, okay, now
the problem was at that end. Previously, when I represented the government, it's a kind of a strange position. It's a little bit like being in the embassy in a way. You have 2 masters. One is the bureaucratic arm of government, and the other one's the political side of government, because you are the face in Japan, and they would be in touch with you directly, which would upset the bureaucrats who you're meant to work for, right?
I hear you.
You know, it's about this power and who's in charge.
Right.
So, in the end, I mean, by this stage, all the politicians and the senior bureaucrats are all a lot younger than me.
Okay.
So I felt comfortable just saying, sorry, I can't do this anymore.
Right.
Without burning bridges, I mean.
That's right.
So at the end of 2016, I retired permanently and threw away my suits.
So what do you do? Because you told me, you said you would. You said you wrote me before you came here. You said, Lance, I have no more suits because I'm living the good life.
Well,
I have no need. I have no need for them
sort
anymore.
of do a bit of. Well, COVID has been a big interruption for everybody.
That has been.
And I bought myself a boat, sailing boat. I love sailing.
How big is it?
26 foot.
Okay, that's good.
It was an old boat. I mean,
Right.
but as they say about any boats, the cheapest day is the day you buy it.
That's right. That's right. After that, it's.
But I do quite a bit of sailing. I do
Okay.
some racing. They keep the boat just north of Sydney at Pittwater.
Had you been doing this prior to that?
I'd done a lot of sailing as a young kid in Hong Kong.
Okay.
So in fact, the boat I bought was very similar. It's the same type of boat that my father used to have in Hong Kong. So it's good for something to do.
Right. Do you go out with people all the time? Do you take people out with you?
Yeah, very close friends of mine live up that way.
Okay.
Guys I used to know in Tokyo and in Hong Kong. So it's sort of geriatrics go sailing kind of thing, which is good fun. And I travelled to Perth quite a bit to help look after my brother.
Right.
And my wife comes down to Sydney twice a year for 3 months at a time. We're in the process now of applying for a permanent residency
That's
for
you
her.
telling me that, right?
We've only been married for 30 years. We're finally getting around to it. But, she loves it here.
Uh-huh.
She's still doing a little bit of singing and that sort of stuff.
Right.
Yeah, she was used to be on a program years ago called The Drifters.
Oh, everyone knows the Drifters, yes.
She was quite a well-known singer years and years ago.
Is it? Okay.
She's just made a couple of new songs which are being played on that sort of, what do you call it, Usain Hosel?
Right.
Yeah, so she keeps busy with that.
That's good.
And hence stayed a member of TAC.
Okay, so she comes here often too.
Yeah, we got I think it's a senior membership now.
Senior, so did I. I got mine, that little grey card.
And it's worth it. I mean, our apartment that we rent is quite small. It's only 2 bedrooms.
Right.
and it's very convenient. It's 2 minutes walk, so
Makes it nice for you, yeah. And then you have access to this all the time when it's
Yeah.
open, so that's good.
yeah.
Makes a big difference.
I remember years ago having some fears about how the, when all of this was being redeveloped and everything, and and I guess the money's still very tight, is it?
They love to say that. I don't like to get into that because there's no reason for it to be.
I guess my concern was the business model
Right.
at the time was based on quite a substantial slab of the revenue base, what I'd call the tax base of the club,
Right, which is
was
our dues.
essentially the changing of memberships.
Well, that's what it was. No, we had the rolling
And
of
so they had to
that.
change
That's right.
the model.
Exactly. They sure did, because we used to get it because corporations were putting people here, and that was a big source of revenue. Every 3 years, we'd get a big swash of that, and it was continuous.
Yeah,
That was
and
the
that
churn.
gradually changed
It changed
because the
where they weren't
expat
hiring.
situation changed, the turnover of people changed.
That's right. Did you envision yourself as a kid when you were growing up? I would assume that you probably wanted to become a pilot.
I did. I've done quite a lot of flying over the years.
So you have your license?
I still have a license,
Okay.
yeah, private license.
Okay.
And I've done. I had a license at one stage to fly, small executive jets. and
Okay,
that's- But I've done it privately. My father
Yeah.
talked me out of it. He said, "Why don't you go to university? And there's more to life than sitting in front of an airplane looking at the midnight sky."
So he convinced you to change, to do something else.
Yeah, and I agreed with him actually.
Okay.
I would have been bored basically.
Right. And so when did this happen? When you were in high school, or when did he start to tell you that you? I mean, did you always have? You wanted to become a pilot up until when?
Oh, I guess my early 20s.
Then he talked you out of it,
Well, at the time I was at university, the Vietnam War was on,
and that's why I got drafted.
and they
this
had
year.
national service conscription in Australia.
Oh, they did?
But it was not based on everybody. It was they would pick certain
percentage.
birthdays out of the
That's
hat.
what they did with ours. Same thing with ours.
So you could be on the 14th of May
Yeah.
and not get picked, and the guy on the 15th got picked,
Right.
which I thought was very unfair, really.
Yeah, well, I got picked. As soon as they pulled you had a number, and it was a percentage base. If your number's low, there's more chance you're going in. They pick up, like, you'd have to have, like, in a big city, you'd need like 1,000, because they'd only pick maybe 200 people. So if you have 1,000, you're safe. My number was 6, and I'm from Los Angeles, so I knew I was going. So I went and enlisted, because I didn't want to go into.
You joined the Air Force, didn't you?
I sure did.
I would have, if I'd been picked, if my number had come up. About that time, the government in Australia changed and conscription was cancelled.
Mm-hmm.
But I would have joined the Air Force Academy and
Right.
gone flying, in
Right.
which case I would have gone flying. But
Right.
I'm glad I didn't, in a way. But
So then your father talked you out of doing this, and then you decided to go into. How'd you get into the container business? Work with Swire?
Well, no, I then, when at university, they started, and Bill Hall was there at the time as one of the tutors and stuff. They started a Japanese department in the economics faculty, and Torque Corporation, who owned property in Western Australia, sponsored the whole thing. And there was a few of us started, a guy called Ken Boston and Bernard Key. Do you remember Bernard Key?
Names are familiar, but I don't.
He was
know.
at Hitotsubashi years ago, but they all formed the core of the department with some Japanese teachers and stuff. And it was a very small group of people with only very few students. And basically intensive language study, so like 40 hours a week for a couple of months to start the program, and then intensive language and also Japanese economic history and politics. So when you came to Japan, you pretty much knew what was going on here,
Right.
which was very helpful. So most of us who graduated from that master's program had scholarships to study here in Japan. So some were at Waseda, Hitotsubashi, some had Monbusho scholarships, and myself and my brother went to Keio. We had a scholarship that was funded by the Australia-Japan Nichiko Keizai Inkai, the Japan-Australia Business Corporation.
That's where you met Bill Hall
I knew Bill Hall from university days.
in Australia.
Yeah.
Which university?
University of Western Australia.
And he was a teacher there?
He was a teacher. He's originally from Sydney,
Okay.
but he'd been studying in Japan. I think he was at Keio.
Mm-hmm.
And he was recruited to be, because he'd done economics as well, he was a teacher or an instructor or a lecturer at the University of WA.
Mm-hmm.
That's where he met Mamiko.
Okay.
Her father was the Consul General in Perth.
Okay. Wow. You know all these.
And Bill was a very good tennis player. He
Yeah,
could have
was
been
he?
a professional tennis player, yeah.
Yeah. He used to play a lot of squash
Yeah,
too.
he was a good squash player too, yeah.
Play a lot of squash at the old tack. Yeah, I used to
So
see
that's
that.
how far that goes back. So,
Doesn't it? Wow.
yeah, so I'd always been in love with Japan.
Mhm.
And we first came to Japan in 1960. So I still have a photo of Tokyo Tower had just been finished.
Just been finished right in the 50s. So in 1960 you came.
We came, yeah.
Wow.
And the first time I ever saw snow was we were up in
I guess-
Lake Chuzenji
Okay.
near Nicol. Yeah, it was. So my father used to fly back and forth to Japan quite a lot. Whenever
Yeah.
he'd come back to Hong Kong, he'd always bring a box of strawberries or
Something-
peaches
right,
or
right.
something
Right.
from Japan, yeah. So we had a number of holidays here in Japan. So it became sort of natural when they started the Japanese department at the University of Western Australia that I was interested in that. So yeah, so hence studying Japanese and then coming here with a scholarship and then pretty much staying in this part of the world ever since.
Wow. Geoffrey, if before I end the podcast, I'd like to ask this. If you could go back in time, knowing what you know now, you're 71 years on this planet. If you could go back in time and talk to the younger Geoffrey and give him advice, what age would he be? What age would he be when you went back, and what would you tell him?
What would I tell a younger me?
Yes.
About-
and how old would you be? About whatever. What advice would you give him?
I often wonder that how the world has changed so much in our lifetime. How difficult it is offering advice to younger people. The world is a completely different place to when you and I were young. It was a simpler place. I do worry a lot about for young people these days, actually, because I have a number of friends whose children have committed suicide in the last number of years. You may know friends who've had that problem as well. And I think the world is quite complicated these days and more stressful, certainly. I don't think when we were younger we actually ever worried about being able to feed ourselves, or there was always something you could do.
That's right.
And I think I noticed, I think in the United States, probably, and certainly in Australia, that mental health is a big problem among younger people. I think the world is, I'm a little bit, worried about where the world is going. And you tend to go into rabbit holes, I suppose, but you see what's happening in the United States with what I call the Trump phenomenon and that kind of thing. That very few people or politicians or leaders in the world have a longer term view of or vision for the world and how to manage the economy and equity and sometimes I find it quite depressing, actually. It's very good to come to Japan. The Japanese seem to be able to sort of wander through all of these issues without getting too stressed about the whole thing. Although I suspect underneath they are quite stressed.
I don't know. I haven't thought about that. But what would you tell yourself with that? You're just telling me what's happening.
What would
now.
I tell myself?
And how old would you be? Or would you tell yourself anything? Are you happy about where you are?
I'm a great believer in the old theory that you get to the fork in the road and you take it. So I think follow your instincts. I think the best thing you can do is to try and educate yourself about something. I think the greatest thing I would tell myself is wherever you want to go, you have to adapt, and you have to. The reason why God gave us 2 ears and only 1 mouth is that we should listen twice as much as we speak, and try to understand other people's perspective. Now, often that doesn't, in this modern world where it's all results oriented and short term and that sort of thing, it's often you run the risk of being accused of going native, you know the expression.
I've heard that, yes.
But I think I would stress the fact that you have to take a longer term perspective, and that managing your life by quarterly results is not going to get you to where you want to go.
I agree. I think that was a big mistake in business or anything else. And we found that out from living in Asia.
Yeah.
They don't do the quarterly. They're thinking long term.
Exactly.
They're thinking long term. They might do it, but that's not what they're really focusing on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. So I think the word is patience.
Yes.
And I think one has to, although I would say I'm not a socialist but I'm certainly not what I'd call a modern capitalist, in the sense that everything is about money.
Right.
And I would urge my children to, or I would continue to urge myself as a younger person, is to look at the bigger picture. So, not treat everything as if you're a professional sportsman and you've only got 5 years to make your wad.
Right.
So, yeah, I think taking a longer term perspective and being a little bit more understanding. The world is becoming much more tribal again now, and I think that's a result of how fragile our economic system really is, and an inability of leadership, political leadership around the world to grapple with problems in a sensible way. Everything seems to just kick the can down the road. The debt issues.
Everything. The social issues.
Modern monetary theorists would say that governments have the printing presses, so it doesn't matter. Debt doesn't matter, but eventually it does.
It does. Yes, it does.
And it may not matter to us, but it matters to our children, who inherit all of our debt.
That's right. That's right. I want to thank you, Geoffrey. But like this, thank you so much.
Not at all.
I want to thank all of you for watching this podcast. Make sure you press like and subscribe. And never forget, it's all unknown, so continue to reach for the stars, because you're too blessed to be stressed.